Explain to me how transgender Americans can serve this country with valor and distinction, willing to make the ultimate sacrifice in our armed forces when Obama's in office and Biden's in office, but they can't do it when Trump's in office. How did they suddenly become, in the words of our head of our Pentagon, Pete Hegseth, dishonest, dissemblers, can't be trusted, prone to suicide, undermine military readiness and lethality? How did that happen overnight? And what about the thousands of transgender Americans who all they want to do is be in a low-paying job to protect our values, our Constitution, and our rights as their rights are being taken away? We got a new decision by Judge Reyes, who's come to the defense of not the transgender community, come to the defense of our constitutional republic and what it means to have warriors willing to defend our freedom for effectively no money at all. And have a draft dodging, let's be frank, president of the United States and a former Fox and Friends anchor step on their Fifth Amendment rights, their 14th Amendment rights, and the rest. And what is the U.S. Supreme Court going to do on this particular issue? They're going to say that it's totally appropriate to disparage and demean, or as this judge wrote in her order, to have policy and decisions dripping in animus and pretext. That's okay. In our democracy, that's the world that we woke up in after November 5th. We cover it all on Legal AF, the podcast. Take a listen. Karen, why don't you kick off Judge Reyes and what you took away from her decision, which blocks the ban on transgender soldiers with a stay in there to give Donald Trump time to go run off to take his inevitable appeal. But what was your takeaway from her writing, which was powerful, very powerful?
Yeah, it was very powerful. And what was really incredible about this is essentially the Trump administration is leaning into what they're doing. And they're not trying to hide it. They're not trying to dress it up in any way. They're coming out and calling transgender individuals as essentially mentally ill and unfit for the military. Period, full stop. They aren't hiding behind it. They aren't trying to say anything about differences in gender, nothing like that. And the judge basically called out the Trump administration and said that their military ban is, quote, soaked in animus. And it was so powerfully written, this decision with the preliminary injunction that she issued that attempts to ban trans people from the military. And some of her, I'm just going to quote from it because what she said is so much more powerful than anything I could paraphrase. So, quote, defendants must show that the discriminatory military ban is in some way substantially related to the achievement of the government's stated objectives, and they must do so without relying on overbroad generalizations about the different talents, capacities, or preferences of males and females. Unconstitutionally, well, she then says the military ban is soaked in animus and dripping with pretext. Its language is unabashedly demeaning. Its policy stigmatizes trans people as inherently unfit, and its conclusions bear no relation to fact. And the executive order that is in question here and that they were litigating about it, and this is through an executive order, one of Trump's favorite new ways of issuing his theatrical edicts. This one was called Prioritizing Military Readiness and Excellence. And it says, consistent with the military mission and longstanding Department of Defense policy, expressing a false, quote, gender identity divergent from an individual's sex cannot satisfy the rigorous standards necessary for military service. Beyond the hormonal and surgical medical interventions involved, adoption of gender identity inconsistent with an individual's sex conflicts with a soldier's commitment to an honorable, truthful, and disciplined lifestyle, even in one's personal life. A man's assertion that he's a woman and his requirement that others honor that falsehood is not consistent with the humility and selflessness required of a service member. So it's just kind of awful. And the policy continues. There's a policy section that declares individuals with gender dysphoria have too many medical, surgical, and mental health constraints to meet the high standards for troop readiness, lethality, cohesion, honesty, humility, uniformity, and integrity. So, I mean, it's just kind of outrageous and I can't even believe that this is something that our government is putting in place. But I think her words are very powerful and poignant, and this will go into effect by the end of the week if they don't appeal.
She did a, they're going to appeal, but the question is, are they going to get a stay from the DC circuit court, which I don't think they're going to get. But look, at the end of the day, she did an amazing job, as she did in the hearing, dismantling all of their justification and showing that it was just a pretext for hatred against transgender people. She led off with a quote from a very well-known treatise looking at how the military over time has always found a way to be prejudiced against a certain group of people, claiming that it would undermine military readiness. That's the stock excuse for prejudice. And she literally said, it's just fill in the blank. Fill in the blank will undermine our readiness, our lethality, our ability of cohesion. Used to be women in the military. Then it was gays in the military. Now it's transgender in the military, transgender people in the military. And at the end of the day, the question is, well, how is it okay under the Obama administration? She then goes through a whole thing. Transgender people are allowed to serve. Obama. Transgender people are not allowed to serve. Trump won. Transgender people are allowed to serve. Biden. Transgender are not allowed to serve. Trump too. What changed? Besides the fact that it's Trump. And then the plaintiff's lawyers did a great job of putting together evidence, as opposed to this 6 days into office, Donald Trump signing another order, and 30 days into his position, Hegseth joining in it. They submitted real evidence. See, judges are like real evidence, like other retired or members of the military responsible for military readiness, saying that these people, these transgender Americans, are just as capable as anybody else and do nothing to undermine readiness. To which Donald Trump responded, I don't like them. I mean, that's basically what the judge said. And you not liking them is the very reason that none of your policy can be justified. And it is a violation of the Fifth Amendment, their due process rights, and it's a violation of their equal protection rights. And then she went through the fact that the government hasn't even tried to properly defend their position at all. And reminded she's not immune to all of this echo chamber of the Trump rapid response team about one single judge in one single district. And she says, you know what? One single judge, one single district. That's what James Madison said in the Federalist Papers when he said, effectively, judges are here in order to keep presidents in line and vice versa. That's the checks and balance. Whenever you hear Carolyn Leavitt talk about separation of powers, you know what you never hear the Trump side of the equation talk about? Checks and balance, and how you check an out of control president, because they don't want that. They think because he's making a commander in chief decision that the judges should just get out of the way and give him a wide berth. And that's not how deference works, especially when it's unsupported by anything. She said during her hearing with the I felt slightly bad for the DOJ lawyer, but not really, who was not prepared at all, intentionally not prepared to debate with the judge. And the judge was saying, do you know how much money is spent by the military on gender dysphoria? No. Okay, I'll tell you. It's $5 million over the last 10 years. He said, okay. She says, do you know how much money is spent every year on Viagra? Every year on Viagra? He said, no. She said $41 million per year. Doesn't seem like this gender dysphoria thing is a problem, does it? I mean, given it's a rounding error, as she referred to it in her order in the national budget. And you have no facts to support it. Then she went through all of the hateful things that Pete Hegseth has said, both in the order that you mentioned, Karen, and in general, in his books, that they are dishonest people, that they are liars, that they can't be trusted. She said, she read off all these things. She said to the lawyer for the Department of Justice, would you agree with me that those things are hurtful and demeaning? I really don't have an opinion about that, Your Honor. And if I read to you these other things that have been said in conjunction with the policy, you would have the same position? That's true. And is there any study that you can point to that you've brought into this courtroom or in the record of this case that supports Hegseth saying that they are dishonest, disloyal, can't be trusted, have increased suicide risk or anything else? Is there any study that you can point to? Not that I know of, Your Honor. So she said to him in the paper, in the opinion, they basically have conceded that there is no evidential support for anything they have done to try to remove these transgender people who are represented by 6 different people, representing 130 years of faithful service to America, who have commendations up and down their service record, one of them is currently serving in a war zone as a transgender American. And she said, this is, as you said before, this is dripping in animus as pretext. And it is obviously, and the reason she's saying that is there's a series of Supreme Court decisions that say, even if you had some sort of legitimate justification for it, the fact that the fundamental basis for your going after this group is because of your prejudice and for political purposes, we are not going to uphold that, and we're going to rip down that policy. By its very nature, it does not deserve to be justified or to be supported. It's going to go now in the next few days up to the D.C. Circuit Court, the appellate court, and we'll get a random 3-judge panel. You and I will know more once we see who the 3 judges are. But they're going to back Reyes. And then it's going to go up to the United States Supreme Court, who has an odd relationship with transgender Americans and not always favorable. But in terms of this policy and drumming them out of the core, what do you think the Supreme Court does? Let's leave it on that, Karen.
Well, it's a good question because, there's a case that was cited in this, called Bostock v. Clayton, which was a 6-3 decision by Justice Gorsuch that basically says that sex discrimination ban in Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 includes bans on discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. And so it'll be interesting to see. That was a military ban, essentially. And so it'll be very interesting. It'll be interesting to see if this military ban excludes from service transgender women and men, or if they're going to narrow it and say, no, Gorsuch meant that only applies to Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, not to the military.
Well, let me open up that for a minute.
Yeah.
Roberts, in the decisions about diversity, equity, and inclusion and affirmative action in higher education, when they tried to apply that to the military, about when the Trumpers and Stephen Miller and the rest and Bannon were trying to argue that the military shouldn't be using DEI for some of its hires, it shouldn't be promoting people, in a way to balance, historic discrimination against Black and brown people in the military, which we've seen forever since there were separated, segregated troops going back to World War I and World War II. It really hasn't changed much, unfortunately, despite the fact that we just had a chairman of the Joint Chiefs who was Black, who was fired by Donald Trump. Because it was the troops and it was our military, Roberts wrote in his opinion that type of thing, esprit de corps and having a balanced military, that's different. And he put a ring fence around it and said they could basically use affirmative action there. The question is, how is that going to play out, that kind of ruling, with Hegseth, 30 days on the job going, I don't like transgender people. Whereas literally every other administration has said it does nothing to undermine readiness and lethality, as they like to say. So now it's going to be landing right in the lap of Roberts, coming off of a couple of bruising interactions with Donald Trump. Welcome back. Well, we built a podcast 5 years ago. It's just about, we just passed actually our 4-year birthday, but we formed it about a year earlier, called Legal AF. And we're in the top 10 as well in the world on all genre. And that's because of you. I know the Midas Touch brothers get a lot of understandable adulation for being in first place, but we're in the top 10. And that's has everything to do with our Midas Mighty and our Legal AFers and being on this particular network and the content that we bring you every week. If you don't know why we called it Legal AF, now you do. We do the show Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube, and you can pick it up on all podcast platforms. audio podcast platforms, or I like to call them podios, that you can find. So until my next reporting, I'm Michael Popok. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.